r/AskReddit. Siblings of narcissists, psychopaths, or sociopaths, what's your experience? My sister has never been diagnosed with narcissism or a personality disorder other than OCD, but when we were younger she often enjoyed telling people, before I met them, that I had a difficult relationship with the truth, so that they wouldn't want to be around me. I had the reputation of a liar and no friends for most of my preteen years, and she was popular in our homeschool group until she left and got into high school. After she left, I still didn't have friends, but neither did she, and she blamed me for it during her frequent temper tantrums. She would throw things, scream, cry, and threaten me with kitchen knives on a pretty regular basis. All of a sudden, the year that I turned 17, and she turned 21, the tantrums stopped, and she got engaged. He moved in with us, the tantrums started again, and for once I wasn't the target. The worst fight there had happened when she caught him looking at a photo of a bikini model, which she considered cheating. She hit him full force with an open palm, and when our mum saw, she threatened to kick her out if she hit him again. They got married, moved out, and divorced within a year of him enlisting in the army. I was playing with a suitcase while watching TV. I was small enough to fit myself in it. My brother, nearly 4.5 years older than me, saw what I was doing and asked to zip me up in it. After already having learned to never trust him, I asked mom to watch us to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. He zipped me up inside the suitcase and started carrying it in a shuffle step. Thump, thump, thump. I heard the sliding door to the enclosed patio open. Mom started screaming, and I could hear her slapping my brother repeatedly. The suitcase fell over onto its side with me still in it. I managed to pry open the zippers from the inside and got myself out of the suitcase as quickly as possible. Mom was still slapping at my brother, screaming why. I was 2 feet away from being dumped inside a suitcase into the family hot tub. He laughed and said that I would have floated. What's the big deal? So, yeah, that's what it was like growing up with a sociopath. The sooner you can put distance between yourself and them, the better. My half-sister was 19 years old when I was born, flipped her shit, and told our mom that she was too old to be having kids, and that she should put me up for adoption. That started our relationship, where she was vocal about not liking me. When our mom got terminal cancer, and she made me medical proxy because I was the only kid at home and was already a caretaker, half-sister protested and said it should be her because she's eldest. She managed to make things about her and not our mom who was fighting fucking stage 4 cancer. When I gave the order, as per mom's verbal and written wishes, to disconnect life support, half-C said I killed mom to inherit shit that was already mine. Haven't seen/spoken to her in a decade, and I plan on keeping it that way. My aunt tried to pull something similar. My grandparents/her parents decided to make their youngest daughter, who was in her early 40s at the time, their medical proxy when/if the time comes, because she's a nurse, and they felt she was best equipped to make medical decisions. My narcissist aunt flipped and said that her sister shouldn't be the medical proxy solely because she was the youngest. It's worth mentioning that the narcissist aunt isn't even the oldest, she's the 5th kid out of 10, but 4th born, because there was a set of twins earlier in the lineup of kids. She still found reasons why all her older siblings couldn't be medical proxy for other reasons though. My grandparents kept the daughter they chose as medical proxy. They can make drama out of any situation, and will try to drag you into it even years later. Example, I'm the next to youngest. My whole family is a shit show, but when I was planning my wedding, I was still trying to pretend I had a reasonable family. My future husband's family was like leave it to beaver. So I asked both of my sisters to be bridesmaids. I knew this was a risk, but I hoped they could keep their shit together for a single evening. At the time, I thought they had. About 8 years later, we were in the same city, because one of our brothers was in the hospital due to a bad car accident. We had one hotel room across the street from the hospital, so people could go rest when they needed to. I was in that room with my oldest sister when she said, "You know, middle sister, still wine glasses from your wedding, right?" I told her I didn't care. A couple of hours later, I was in that room with my middle sister. She said, "You know, older sister, stole glasses from your wedding, right?" I also told her I didn't care. So here we are, waiting to see if our brother was going to die, and both of these bitches are playing reindeer games with me, trying to make me be angry with the other one. Our brother lived. I've cut contact with all my siblings, because they are all like this. They have to start shit, no matter what the situation or consequences. My brother was diagnosed with NPD at 16. He's never had empathy. Children learn empathy at some point, but it was like he never reached that developmental stage. He wasn't concerned when people got hurt. He hit and bullied others in school to get what he wanted. Doctors, therapists, medication. Nothing made a difference, and it's not like there was some kind of trauma or a reason for his behavior. It's like he was just born wrong. When he was 10 he started taking and dealing drugs as a drug runner for some older teens. You can't be prosecuted under 14 in Germany. My parents called our version of CPS for help. He got more therapy, some inpatient stays, and his own social worker. He stole my dad's car when he was 12 and got picked up by the cops. He got his first charges at 14, drugs and assault. My parents were at their wits' end and agreed to have him placed in a group home for troubled teens for a year. He was kicked out shortly before the year was up. He came home and seemed to recognize in a clinical, detached kind of way that he couldn't go on like this without ending up in prison. He was about 15. He started being less violent, but he had insane delusions of grandeur and needed everyone to comply with whatever he wanted. If they didn't, he lashed out. My parents still made him go to therapy. He assaulted my dad and choked him because he didn't want to. My brother was 16, but also 6 feet 3 and about 190 lbs. My dad died from a sudden aneurysm when he was 16, and he went off the rails completely. He got a girl pregnant and she was kicked out by her mom. My mom took her in. The girl was not a bad person, just had some issues, so it wasn't that surprising that she'd date my brother, who could be charming if the situation demanded it. He beat her up at our house a couple months later while she was still pregnant. That was the last straw for my mom. She kicked my brother out. We helped the girl to find an apartment for her and the baby. Unsurprisingly, my mom caved a short while later and let my brother move back in. He seemed to think he was the head of the household. My parents never married, so my father's modest possessions went to me and my brother instead of my mom, and that included the car my dad bought a year before he died. It was the first brand new car he ever bought, a small one, but he was proud of it. My brother made my mom sell it so he could get his half of the money. It wasn't even a fucking expensive one, and my mom was devastated to lose my dead dad's little car. I was 20 then, my brother was 17. He was verbally abusive and basically tortured my mom mentally. He threatened to hit me on a daily basis whenever I didn't do something or give him something he wanted. He also threatened to kill me a couple of times. On a particular bad day he told my mom that he'd have no trouble to get a couple guys to run her off the road when she went out. When the threats got stale, he'd beat me up every couple weeks. There was one particular instance where I was actually afraid he was going to kill me. He did his usual spiel of using me as a verbal punching bag because he had had a bad day and I was just burnt out. Didn't even react anymore. He hit me a couple of times and choked me. No idea how, but I fought him off, grabbed my phone, and ran to the bathroom where I locked myself in before he could get to me again. He was trying to beat down the door while I called the cops. The cops did nothing. Told me he lived there, so we'd have to get along, and since we both said opposing things, nothing would come of it. I insisted they take my fucking statement. My mom wasn't home at the time, but she was a wreck anyway and couldn't deal anymore. A couple days later, my aunt came to visit for a couple of days. My brother was his charming, manipulative self for her. My aunt tried to pressure me into not pressing charges, since apparently I gave myself the dozens of bruises and contusions I had, as my brother had told her. I was severely suicidal at that point and gave my mom an ultimatum, me or him. She kicked him out again. He came back a year later and I moved out for college immediately. I don't blame my mom much anymore, rock and a hard place and all that, but she never could understand the fact that her love for her son was misplaced. He didn't have the things that made someone human. He had no empathy, he was not capable of love, he was just an empty shell that went through life trying to get whatever pleasures he so desired by whatever means necessary. I haven't spoken to or seen him in about 7 years, but my mom's still in contact with him. He went to Spain when the mother of his daughter tried to get child support. Sometimes, my mom still talks about the things he's done. A couple examples. For some reason, his ex-girlfriend started letting him see his daughter, and she flies to Spain with my mom once or twice a year, or used to, anyway. He locked her in the basement with an adult-sized portion of food she threw up on because she couldn't eat anymore. She was 4, hard to remember, or so. She doesn't want to go visit him anymore. He withheld rent from his Spanish landlord for like 6 months. The landlord had terminal cancer and my brother saw it as a waste to give money to a dying man. He married a girl in Spain and had another kid, and he now makes a living as a realtor. From what I've heard, he still thinks he's God's gift to mankind. I don't think I'd even go to his funeral if he died. I'm in a nearly identical situation with my 16-year-old brother. He's an abusive drug addict and only thinks of himself. He acts in the same way, charming around others to get what he wants, then bullies and beats the shit out of my mother and I. I've called the police at least 5 times, and they said, unless he wants to change his behavior they can't do anything. I even had a restraining order on him this year that did shit. Additionally, my granddad died earlier this year, which we thought would have an effect, but no. He refuses to go to therapy and throws away every opportunity anyone gives him in the hope of getting him in a better place, but expects the world handed to him on a silver platter despite not putting in any effort. All he does is do drugs and abuse us day and night. It's exhausting and the most frustrating thing when people don't believe you or don't want to listen about what's going on. Yesterday I started to organize therapy for myself through my work as it's getting too hard to live my life and meet my responsibilities with the way he treats my mother and I. She told me the other week that if it wasn't for me and her mother, she would be here and would either kill him or herself. No one knows what to do and we feel helpless. When it comes to sibling abuse, I'm finding it nearly impossible to handle or solve. I genuinely hate him and wish he wasn't in our life because of the way he acts and treats us. I used to joke when we were much younger that we don't want to get him tested in case he got a syndrome named after him. Now I wouldn't be surprised if that really happened, but knowing him had used it as an excuse to continue his behavior. I hope you are better now and that you've addressed how this might have affected you. Lots of love to you and your mother. My older sister and I used to physically fight and such when my family was here. Then I lived with her and my brother in a duplex for school. I had to clean up everything. If I told her to clean her own stuff up, she would yell at me and follow me around if I wanted to get away from her. She had thrown all of my stuff that she could get her hands on outside in the backyard, which is the main entrance for the place. My clothes, electronics, glasses, etc. Some broken and ripped, all because my boyfriend and I had left for class after she asked me for a ride with us 5 minutes before I had to leave. Boyfriend had a car, I didn't. She would constantly monopolize the car my mom left for all of us to share, so I would have to take the bus or ask friend/boyfriend to take me to the grocery store to buy groceries. Throughout our childhood and in our teenage years, she'd tell stories that were pretty convincing, but when talking to someone else involved, nothing like that happened. She knew I liked one of her friends and then proceeded to have sex with him the following week. She'd always get my mom to shell out cash for her and she'd spend it on drugs. The final thing is, when she would not leave me alone, since she thought that I had her boyfriend's clothes. I didn't. When I was trying to do homework in my room, she wouldn't leave my room, so I had to leave or try to drag her out. My brother tried to help, but he gave up and just played some games in his room. I had gotten her out of my room and locked the door so she wouldn't get in, but she kept pounding the door and screaming at the top of her lungs for hours. It was so stressful. She then threatened that she will beat me up and plunge a knife through my chest once she got the door open. Then she acted as if she was the victim when I called my parents and let them hear what she was saying. I got super stressed and wanted her to stop, so I opened the door and quickly punched her in the face, then closed the door again. It was quiet for a minute, but then the threats came in again, more pounding on the door. Also, when my friend came to pick me up, since I was at my wit's ends, she tried to make my friend think I was the person who started the argument, said that I broke her bracelet. It broke when she kept pounding on the door. I just grabbed important documents, my school stuff, and clothes and left for 1 to 2 months. My parents were saying that it was equally my fault for what happened. IDK how. Funny thing is that she left the place once I came back, and my parents blamed me for it and kept telling me off. They did not do that to my older sister when I was out of the house for months. They told me I broke the family and that a few years down I will be laughing about the whole incident. Haven't laughed about it. I don't talk to my sister, and she has tried speaking to me, but I don't want her in my life anymore. My parents give me shit about it, saying that we should make up and be a family again, but I get panic/anxiety attacks at even the thought of my older sister. I've had constant nightmares for a solid 3 to 4 months of my older sister coming to my place and just beating me up, making me do drugs with her. She puts a needle in me mainly, stabbing me, chasing me and threatening me. I still get very anxious when I think I see her somewhere. We live in the same city. Last I heard she was still going to the same college. I'm not sure now though. She called the cops and CPS, repeatedly accusing our stepdad of child abuse. It usually lined up with her having rules and punishments. She didn't like that my parents did research on how to raise a psychopath that doesn't become a murderer. They suddenly knew all her tricks and tactics. I sometimes think about how sad it must be to be physically incapable of feeling human emotions, but it clearly would only hold her back. Edit. Her diagnosis was emerging antisocial personality disorder because they said they couldn't diagnose someone under 25 as a psychopath. Dad acts really similar, so I assume whatever she has, he has that too. To add some more, now that I'm more awake, I lost almost all of my friends. My family, besides my immediate, totally ignore me because me and my mum protected my stepdad by saying my sister was lying about the abuse. Just to be clear, we were investigated multiple times and CPS said they were doing a phenomenal job raising so many kids with so many mental health issues so well. They put down that they were false claims the first 2 times and after that they were like, we just have to investigate to be sure. Just do the interviews and get it done. We have to do it every time, which I do appreciate the diligence if a child is really being abused, but we had stuff from therapists and counselors that were all like, has a history of lying, tells lies to get what she wants, and my entire family still thinks we're protecting a monster. The real kicker is that our biological father is also a psychopath and actually a child abuser. Guess who she moved in with when my aunts refused to let her go back to my mum's? If you guessed our actually abusive dad, who was now basically giving her psychopath 101 courses just by being near each other, then you're right. All our family who banded together in a fickle justice brigade about child abuse are now BFFs with the guy who used to threaten to break my legs and choke me and hit me when I was 7 or younger. I'm sure it makes my mom feel great too, knowing that all her sisters took her abuser's side after a lengthy divorce battle that he kept coming back with more and more affidavits for and just drained her emotionally and financially for years on end. I could write a book about how much they've all hurt me by being or enabling a psychopath. I'm pretty certain that at least some of my aunts are narcissistic. Last week my grandma went on a tirade about me not forgiving, but no one has ever apologized or even acknowledged that they did anything wrong. I won't drug sweep something that still hurts me regularly, and apparently that makes me that problem again. My brother was one of those grandiose narcissists. A typical example of his everyday behavior was the time he purchased a can of an uncommon brand of cola and then bragged for days about it, as though he had discovered the cure for cancer or something, all because it wasn't Pepsi or Coke. Those were for common people. My mom would hang on his every word. She pretty much lived vicariously through him, and he could do no wrong in her eyes. He could act like a jerk towards me, and she would make excuses for him, no matter how awful it was. However, once when he didn't like the birthday gift I have him, she acted like I had committed a crime. Our parents were really against drugs. However, when my brother decided to grow marijuana in our house, our mom was enthusiastically supportive of it. However, a few years later, when I smoked pot and my parents found out, well, suddenly I was the one who ruined Christmas for the family. My brother was living 3,000 kilometers away when she became gravely ill. I phoned him and told him he needed to get out here pronto if he wanted to say goodbye. The best he could manage was to come out a week later. She hung on for that week waiting for him to show up. When I would visit her at the hospital and say, "I'm here, Mom," she would respond with, "I want your brother." She instructed the hospital staff to not tell me anything, so when I would ask how she was doing, I would get a "that's private confidential information" type of response. Meanwhile, my brother would phone the hospital daily and they would tell him everything about her care, from the medications she was on, her blood work levels, her treatment options. It was pretty much palliative by that point, and all that. I could not even get a "she slept well last night" from the nurses, but he could tell me her blood oxygen levels from 3,000 kilometers away. Every day that I talked to him, I would ask him if could not come out sooner. But he could never get away from work, even though he was one of the highest ranking people at his job. I took care of the house while she was in the hospital. I cleaned up all the diarrhea, did her laundry, took care of the bills, but wasn't a welcome visitor to her bedside. When he finally did show up, he visited her for a short while, then said, "Let's go for lunch" to me. She passed away as soon as we stepped out of the hospital. She hung on just to hear him say hello. My little brother is a narcissistic, sociopath and psychopath. I come from a culture where the family bond is incredibly important, and no matter how bad your family is, always forgive them, protect them, and take care of them. For 25 years we lived through fucking hell because of that piece of shit. It really pained me, but I gave up on him years ago. My mother, however, being a Turkish mom, forgave him countless times, but he only got worse. I mean, I knew something was wrong back when we were still kids, but I would still always do my best to be the good brother and role model. I would always protect him and simultaneously get the blame for all his mistakes. My mother was in the hospital giving birth to my oldest sister. We were home alone, and he asked me if he could go out and play in front of our house. We have a great park in front of our home and live in a very green area. I gave him permission only for his friend to come back an hour or two later and tell me that my 11-year-old piece of shit little bro, I was 13, we might have been a bit younger, was arrested for theft. We were a well-off family. He was my mom's sweetheart. He never needed money or needed to steal. He did it just for attention. Just because he was upset our sister might take his place. I had to pick him up, and I remember crying out of shame while this fucking cunt had a smile from ear to ear. He didn't give a shit. Police brought us both home. My parents were back from the hospital with my little sister, and the house was filled with friends and acquaintances. I remember feeling so much shame and embarrassment, profusely apologizing to my mom. I felt responsible. As the years passed by, this became worse and worse and worse, and we all basically lived in a constant state of terror and anxiety because of this lousy subhuman piece of shit. I'm too embarrassed to share most other stories, and I rather just not think about them anymore. We've finally cut him out of our life after 25 years. Imagine having to hide all your stuff because your house is never safe. Never being able to ask for anything as a teen, because if I ask for 5 my little brother has to get 50. Imagine having to worry if you can leave because this little terrorist cunt might threaten your mother and steal her stuff or take her money. For a while he had a really pretty GF. My mom hoped this would help him, not my lies. And he treated her like she was his property. This one time he was yelling and threatening her, dragging her off THR stairs. I heard the commotion, and when I saw it, I rushed to them, slapped him on the face, and put him in a chokehold, told him if I ever heard him behave like that I'd break his legs. This allowed this poor girl to run off and get out of our house with my little brother yelling how he would end her. He later explained to me how he got angry because she talked back and wouldn't lend him money. At this point he spends €1,500 a night in clubs. When she finally dumped this piece of shit, he called her dad to tell him his daughter was a filthy slut and sent him pictures of her underwear, etc. He then became incredibly depressed, not because he loved her. He always talked about breaking up with her and how she bored him, etc. But because she was his property, and how dares she leave him? He owned her. He then took my parents' new car and smashed it into a wall for attention. Just fast enough that it totaled the car, but also slow enough that he came out of the car without a scratch. I mean, he had his own car, new BMW, that he also got by manipulating my mom. But he didn't use that, he used my parents' car. He claimed his car had no gas. I checked it, and it was fucking full. He then emotionally manipulated my mom about how he was suicidal, blaming us for not being more supportive. He used this for months as an excuse for his shitty behavior and intensified daily. The only person he actually feared was me, so I felt this incredible fucking burden on me to try and keep him in check. I couldn't leave him alone with my mom. I couldn't move out because I was worried sick he might kill her one day. I tried to talk with him, but no amount of talking etc worked. He made 1,000 promises th then came up with some point lame excuse about how 19 years ago I once hit him, so this was all my fault. I fucking hit him because he was about to smash this kid's face in with a fucking rock. Or point how he was once grounded and had to stay in his room for 2 days, so he was psychologically scared. I mean, I beat up at least 50 kids for this piece of shit. He'd always intentionally pick a fight with older, bigger kids and use my name to get out of trouble. Anyway, I can go on for fucking ever. And these are literally just the tame things I mentioned. My little brother was evil incarnate. It took years to finally break all contact. Because ESP, my mom always hoped he'd get better, and she even excused his threats and theft, even though he could just ask. He liked stealing our stuff despite the fact that we'd have given it to him if he asked. He'd take money from our pockets, valuables for my rooms, etc. I couldn't go to the bathroom without locking my door, but we finally no longer have contact. It's like this burden is lifted off my shoulders. I no longer have to worry he's threatening, stealing, or pressuring my mom, abusing her trust etc etc. The anxiety and terror we all felt on a daily fucking basis literally ruined our life. He literally made my mother sick. She was the strongest woman I knew, and this piece of shit destroyed her bit by bit. He ruined over 20 years of my life, and I will never forgive him for what he did. I do no longer consider him my brother, family, or even an acquaintance, and in all honesty I won't even go to his fucking funeral, and don't want him to come to mine. Fuck him. P.S. This is why I believe some people are born evil. This piece of shit had an incredibly loving and supportive family that gave him all the attention he needed or wanted. But it was never enough. It was like absolutely no one, except he was real. None of us mattered. He treated his friends, girls etc all thr same way. This was made worse with how social and manipulative he was. Everyone that met him thought he was great and funny until he took their money etc. And one day he just switched and threatened them, spread lies about them etc and did absolutely everything to ruin them. He would never ever forgive anything and was so stubborn that he would cut his own arm just so he could get back at someone or get his revenge. Even though he was always the wrong party, he made up this delusional stories in his head that made him the one that was the victim. I mean, my mother once refused to give him money because he had stolen 500 euros from her. He was like 15. So he went into her room, and when he couldn't find money he took a scissor and cut up all her clothes and shoes, then took all the sauces we had at home and squeezed the mayo, ketchup, BBQ sauce and anything else you can imagine on the clothes he cut all over her floors and carpet and her bed. Even years later this piece of shit used that as an example of my mom being a bad mom or treating him wrong, saying my little sister got pocket money but she couldn't spare to give him some money. He blamed her and my mom to my fucking frustration for years like an idiot. I love her, but this is the one thing I absolutely resent. Apologized to him saying she should have just given him the money. When I hot angry about this and explained to my mom she shouldn't ever apologize to him because in his head it legitimizes his behavior, she simply says she doesn't want to cause any drama and problems in the house. She was fucking scared. The problem is the more she did it the worse it got, something she now finally realizes. Fuck man, I just keep ranting and I can go on forever. I'm going to stop now. Literally made myself depressed thinking back. Anyway, fuck him. We're all happier than we've ever been now that we are rid of this piece of shit. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.